What do we do when life throws us a curveball? What do we do when everything that we once knew to be normal is no longer normal? How do we respond? Do we respond in a way of giving up? Do we stop moving forward? Do we just sit tight and wait in the fetal position and hope that everything's going to turn out okay? Or do we push on? The book of Acts opens up with Jesus ascending into heaven, being hidden by a cloud. And the disciples are forced with the question of, what do we do now? And it's in the book of Acts that we find what they did. They embraced the Holy Spirit. They let Him lead and guide them. They were uncomfortable. They embraced a new normal. In 1995, the nation of South Africa was at a pivotal moment in their history. For some 50 years prior to this, a system of government known as apartheid was the norm. It was a system that forced segregation of races, a system that allowed the white minority population to maintain control of the majority black nation. But now that system has ended. In fact, just 1 year prior, the first black president was elected into office. It's a new normal for this tiny nation. This new president's name is Nelson Mandela. He had been fighting against apartheid for most of his life. He had been imprisoned for 27 years, and now he is in charge of the country. What does he do with this new power, this new authority? The world certainly would have understood if Mandela had sought out retribution for the way he and his people had been treated for so many years. But that's not what happened at all. In fact, what happened is the stuff movies are made of. Literally, they made a movie about it. It's called Invictus. It's the story of how Nelson Mandela partnered with Francois Pienaar, the captain of the South African rugby team, the Springboks, to unite a nation. To the blacks of South Africa, the Springbok team was the very symbol of apartheid government. In fact, black Africans, they would cheer on every team that played against the Springboks. But to the white Afrikaners, rugby was their whole world, and their Springboks were their team. Mandela knew this, and he knew that with South Africa hosting the 1995 Rugby World Cup, the eyes of the world would be on them. So he made the decision not to change the colors or the name of the Springbok team. They would remain the green and gold, and they would remain the Springboks as an effort to reach out to the white Afrikaners. Mandela would push for the black South African people to cheer on the green and gold, and was oftentimes met with boos and anger at this request from the crowds of the people who wanted to see the team dismantled. But Mandela knew the key to moving forward in this new normal for his nation wasn't retribution, but was in fact reconciliation. Amazingly, the underdog Springbok rugby team made it to the championship game. The stands were filled to the brim with 62,000 people cheering on their team. Outside the stadium, the whole nation, white, black, rich, and poor, had united around this rugby team to cheer them on to victory. Before the match started, Nelson Mandela emerged out on the field wearing a green and gold Springbok jersey and hat to shake the hands of the players and wish them good luck. The stadium went crazy. It erupted in cheers when they saw their president emerge in that green and gold, and they began to chant, "Nelson, Nelson, Nelson." A nation that had been torn apart for so many years had finally come together under the banner of one country, one team. The early church faced a similar pivotal moment, as we find in the book of Acts. For literally hundreds of years, the Jewish people were God's chosen people. The children of Israel were seen as clean and could have a relationship with God. Anyone not of the nation of Israel, a Gentile, was considered unclean. And if you ever wanted to have any sort of relationship with God at all, you had to jump through some major hoops to get clean. And even if you did, you still weren't quite in. but the Spirit of God was shaking up that normal. As Christians fled the persecution of Jerusalem, they worshiped and shared the gospel with anyone and everyone who would listen. Gentiles were receiving the gift of the Holy Spirit just like Jews. In fact, Paul, who was formerly known as Saul, he was traveling the world now on mission trips, preaching the gospel specifically to Gentiles. And they were turning to Jesus by the hundreds, by the thousands. This new normal, however, was starting to cause a problem. And that problem was the fact that Gentiles had a very different set of customs and values than those of the Jewish people. The Gentiles sacrificed animals to idols. Sex was often a form of worship to certain gods. The moral compass was vastly different than that of the Jews. The Jews had the law of Moses with some pretty strict laws concerning marriage, what foods to eat and what foods not to eat, how to worship the one and only God, how to wash your hands properly. How could these two very different groups of people come together to worship the one true God together? This was the question the leaders of the early church struggled with. It was a question that, if answered incorrectly, could have some serious consequences for the continuing spread of the gospel. Many of the devout Jewish Christians argued that the Gentiles would essentially need to convert to Judaism before they could receive the salvation of Jesus, while those like Paul and Barnabas and Peter were arguing that God hadn't made a distinction in the pouring out of the Holy Spirit on the Gentiles. He had given the Holy Spirit freely to them, so why should we make a distinction? So this question of how to move forward in this new normal was so important that in Acts chapter 15, we find there was a council meeting held in Jerusalem. Of all the church leaders, of the apostles, the elders, the missionaries, the deacons of the church, everyone came together to decide, does the law of Moses or the law of grace take precedent when it comes to salvation? And so after going back and forth for some time, after hearing the reports from Paul and Barnabas of the Holy Spirit's work among the Gentiles, the council had come to a decision. The path forward was to make it as easy as possible for the Gentiles to turn to God, only asking that Gentiles who chose to turn to God should abstain from food offered to idols, from blood, from eating anything that had been strangled, and from sexual immorality. This decision was a huge victory for the message of grace and mercy that God was offering to all people of every nationality, of every gender, of every economic status. The good news of Jesus is this, Acts 13:39, everyone who believes in Jesus is justified through him from everything they could not be justified from through the law of Moses. Everyone. So, are you someone who's embracing a ministry of reconciliation for all people to come to the Lord? Or are you someone who makes it as difficult as possible for someone to accept Jesus? As you read through Acts this week, pay close attention to how the Spirit of God isn't going after specific races or genders or classes of people. No, the Spirit of God is moving to create a new normal that brings all of humanity back into a relationship with Him. He is working through His people to make us a light for everyone, to bring salvation to the ends of the earth. So I want to challenge you to embrace this mission, embrace this new normal. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all, through all, and in all. And now, Lord, consider their threats and grant that your servants may speak your word with boldness, while you stretch out your hands for healing and signs and wonders are performed through the name of your holy servant, Jesus.